In 1795, Ulster was in the midst of a bloody sectarian conflict, and the violence culminated in the Battle of the Diamond, fought between the Protestant People Day Boys and the Catholic Defenders. The battle left over 30 men dead, and the People Day Boys emerged victorious. The Protestants were emboldened by their success, and so they sought to formalise their organisation, making it into a more structured and disciplined force. And so they established the Orange Order, an organisation that would have a lasting impact on Irish politics right up until the present day. But to understand the root of this sectarian conflict and the Orange Order itself, we have to go back to the 1600s and to the beginning of the 17th century, which saw the defeat of the Irish army and the collapse of the Gaelic social order. In the wake of this defeat, the Gaelic aristocracy in Ulster, which was once a stronghold of resistance against English power, left Ireland to seek support from abroad for a new uprising. This support never came, and the English were able to solidify their control over Ulster, and they began a colonising process known as the Plantation of Ulster. Land was confiscated from the native Irish and handed over to English and Scottish settlers. The colonial plantations of Ulster were reinforced in the reconquest of Ireland by the armies of Oliver Cromwell in the middle of the 1600s. However, by 1688, Britain was faced with the prospect of an enduring Catholic dynasty and a full Catholic restoration when the wife of James II gave birth to a son and a heir, James Stuart. The fact that James II now had a heir accelerated conspiracies among the English and Irish landed Protestant elites, and so they sought to usurp James Stuart and offer the crown to James II's oldest daughter, Mary, who was raised Protestant and who was married to her first cousin, the Dutch Prince William of the House of Orange. However, William refused to be subordinate to Mary, so William and Mary were jointly offered the crown of England, and thus they began their reign. But in order to secure the crown of Great Britain and its Irish appendage, a fresh conquest of the three kingdoms had to be set in motion. And so England was invaded by a Dutch navy and army in 1689, and the country fell to William of Orange almost without a blow. James fled to France, and the Jacobite forces in Scotland were quickly defeated. The Dutch had now secured two kingdoms, leaving Catholic Ireland loyal to James, and Ireland is where James eventually went. In Ulster, James's Irish Catholic supporters captured most of the province and overran the plantation towns, but they failed to win at the Siege of Derry in 1689. And then James's forces were decisively beaten at the Battle of Aughrim in the west of Ireland, which signalled an end to any hope of success for the Jacobite cause. The Dutch invasion and the unlawful coup d'etat against King James firmly established a Protestant ascendancy on the two islands, and laws were passed, known as the Penal Laws, to suppress Catholicism. In Ireland, lands were reconfiscated and colonial settlements intensified, and by the 1780s, almost 100 years since the Protestant ascendancy had been firmly established, an underground secret society known as the People Day Boys had been terrorising the local Catholic population. They were responsible for the expulsion of thousands of Catholics from their homes and numerous sectarian murders. And these raids were conducted under the pretense of confiscating arms from Catholics, which they were banned from possessing under the terms of the penal laws. During these raids, Catholics were beaten and killed, and they had their homes ransacked and burned. And so, in response to these attacks, the Catholic population formed an organisation known as the Defenders to defend their communities. Clashes between the People Day Boys and the Defenders gradually began to intensify until things finally came to a head in 1795 at the Battle of the Diamond, which took place near Loughgall in Armagh and resulted in 30 deaths. Immediately after the battle, Protestant men gathered at the inn of James Sloane, and here they established the Orange Order with this objective to curb both Pope and Popery in Ireland, and they swore to defend the king and his heirs so long as he or they support the Protestant ascendancy. And with the establishment of the Orange Order in September 1795, a new wave of sectarian violence engulfed Ulster. In the following months, approximately 10,000 Catholics were expelled from County Armagh. And the governor of Armagh, Lord Gosford, condemned the Protestant extremists who are orchestrating the violence and who are largely drawn from the newly formed Orange Order. Lord Gosford said that it is no secret that a persecution is now raging in this country. The only crime is profession of the Roman Catholic faith. Lawless bandits have constituted themselves judge. And in the backdrop of this sectarian conflict, partial Catholic emancipation had been achieved with the Catholic Relief Act in 1792, which removed many of the substantial restrictions that were imposed on Catholics by the penal laws. And alongside this, Irish republicanism was on the rise, and the United Irishmen, who were attempting to unite Irishmen of every religious persuasion, were rapidly gaining influence across the country. And it's in the midst of this perceived threat that the order was established and proliferated. And the Orange Order, of course, takes its name from William of Orange, who defeated King James during the Jacobite Wars. You see, from the 1790s onwards, there had been a number of popular Orange societies and clubs, particularly in Ulster, and it was in this tradition that the Orange Order was established. And one of the great ironies of history is that William of Orange was actually supported by the Pope in his war against the Jacobites. And that's because the Jacobites were allied with France, and a French army had marched upon Rome a few years previous to avenge an insult that was offered to France. And the French king had a tendency to act like a dictator in church affairs, and he was inclined to tell the Pope how to govern his flock in other countries. And so His Holiness was anxious to see this dictatorial monarch subdued and chastised for his own good and for the good of others. And so in 1686, certain continental powers joined together in a league known as the League of Augsburg for the purpose of curbing the arrogant power of France. And these powers were impartially Catholic and Protestant. So the Dutch invasion and the unlawful coup d'etat was funded by the Pope, and William's success was celebrated with the Te Deum sung in the Vatican. Meanwhile, the Orange Order offered their first celebration of King William's victory with their first ever march on the 12th of July 1796, which took place in 3 locations: Portadown, Lurgan and Warrenstown. Drums were beaten and sectarian songs were sung, displaying their overtly contemptuous superiority. And the British government immediately saw the potential in the Orange Order as a tool which they could use to suppress the United Irishmen. You see, the United Irishmen were opposed to sectarianism and religious bigotry of any kind, and they were rapidly gaining influence across Ireland and in Ulster, particularly among the Presbyterian community. That idea of an Irish Republic based on the principles of religious liberty and national unity for Catholic, Protestant and dissenter was very appealing to large sections of Irish society. And so the British government sought to hinder this goal by fomenting sectarianism. They would create disunity and disorder under the pretense of zeal for the Protestant religion, and they would spread conspiracies about Catholic plots to massacre the Protestant population. And then, in 1796, a yeomanry force was created by the British government to combat the threat posed by the United Irishmen, and the yeomanry was largely drawn from Orangemen recruited in Ulster. In fact, practically all of the yeomanry in the 1790s were members of Orange lodges, and by May 1797, the campaign of terror orchestrated by the Orange yeomanry began in earnest. They massacred 11 civilians at a gathering in Cavan, and in Dundalk they killed 14. Thomas Knox, a British military commander in Ulster, wrote that despite the licentiousness of the Orangemen, we must to a certain degree uphold them, for on them we must rely for the preservation of our lives and properties should critical times occur. And those critical times did occur in the summer of 1798, when the United Irishmen rose up in arms against the British government. And the year 1798 was a defining moment for Ireland and for the Orange Order. An Irish Republic was decisively defeated by the forces of the Crown. 100,000 troops had been deployed in support of the British government. Soldiers and militia, yeomen and Orangemen all rallied in defence of the Crown and the Protestant ascendancy, and the United Irishmen were ruthlessly suppressed. The Orange Order then entered a lull period after the Act of Union was passed, which the order actually opposed if it meant Catholic equality. But during the key years of the Napoleonic Wars, vigorous parading was resumed, and there were violent clashes with ribbonmen in an attempt to finally pacify Catholics in Ulster and Leinster. The Orange Order was eventually outlawed by the British government in 1825 under the Unlawful Societies Act, but it was revived 2 years later in 1827 to face the threat posed by Daniel O'Connell's Catholic Association. Many prominent members of the British establishment rallied behind the Orange Order, and a member of the British royal family, His Royal Highness Ernest Augustus, fifth son of George III, became the Grand Master of England in 1827. However, other prominent members of the British establishment rejected invitations to join the Orange Order, such as the Duke of Wellington, who cited his sectarian nature as an obstacle. Meanwhile, after Daniel O'Connell's Catholic Association had won their objective, the Orange Order was again declared to be an illegal organisation in 1836. But 9 years later, in 1845, just in time for the Great Hunger, it was revived and re-legalised by the British government, and sectarian clashes followed. And the most significant of these clashes took place in County Down when an Orange Order march was taking place on the 12th of July 1849, and 1,500 armed Orange men ambushed a return parade of about 1,000 unarmed ribbon men, and the Orange men then proceeded to burn down nearby Catholic homes, and they left dozens of innocent Catholics dead. But despite the Order's tendency towards violent sectarianism, successive British administrations tolerated a revival of Orangism whenever its position in Ireland felt insecure, and the Order's role as a counter-revolutionary force continued into the 20th century. This sectarian ideology played a key role in forming the ideological outlook of the six-county state that was established in the north of Ireland. And quite predictably then, the newly formed state saw rampant institutional sectarianism, along with regular pogroms and massacres being orchestrated against its Irish Catholic population.